The gunshot that echoed through the canyon that morning in September of 1877 brought Garrett Xavier riding hard toward the smoke rising from what remained of a burned wagon, though he would have preferred to mind his own business and keep moving toward Lavetta, Colorado. His cattle ranch needed supplies, and he had already lost 2 days to a lame horse, but something about the desperate quality of that single shot made him dig his heels into his stallion's flanks anyway. When he crested the rocky hill overlooking the narrow pass, he saw her kneeling beside 2 bodies, a smoking pistol dangling from her trembling hand, and 3 dead outlaws sprawled in the dust around her. She looked up at him with eyes so hollow they seemed to stare through him rather than at him, her face streaked with ash and tears, her dress torn at the shoulder. She could not have been more than 20 years old, but in that moment she looked ancient with grief. Garrett dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible, approaching like he would a spooked horse. "They are dead," she said, her voice flat and distant. "My parents. The wagon overturned when the wheel broke, and then these men came. They wanted our supplies, our money, everything. My father tried to fight them. My mother tried to run." Garrett looked at the 2 bodies covered partially by a scorched blanket. The wagon had burned almost completely, leaving only the iron frame and smoking wood. He recognized the work of the Murphy gang, a group of outlaws who had been terrorizing the mountain passes between New Mexico and Colorado for months. "You shot 3 armed men?" Garrett asked, looking at the outlaws sprawled in various positions of violent death. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12, she said. "We were traveling from Kansas to start fresh in California. He said a woman needed to know how to protect herself out here." She looked down at the gun in her hand as if seeing it for the first time, then dropped it like it had burned her. "I waited until they were distracted, arguing over my mother's jewelry. I just started shooting. I did not think. I just pulled the trigger until they stopped moving." Garrett picked up the pistol and checked it. Empty. 6 shots, 3 men dead, which meant she was either incredibly lucky or an excellent shot under pressure. He looked around the scene, taking in the dried blood, the scattered belongings, the complete devastation of everything this young woman had known just hours ago. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Josephine Wright," she said. "Everyone calls me Josie." "Well, Josie, I am Garrett Xavier. I have a ranch about 15 miles from here, just outside Lavetta. We need to bury your parents properly, and then you are going to have to come with me. You cannot stay out here alone." She looked at him with those empty eyes. "I have nowhere else to go. My aunt in California does not even know we were coming. We had no way to send word ahead." They spent the next 2 hours digging graves in the hard Colorado soil. Garrett did most of the work while Josie gathered what few belongings had survived the fire. A photograph in a silver frame, miraculously unbroken. A Bible with a cracked leather cover. A cameo brooch that must have been her mother's. She wrapped these items carefully in a shawl and held them against her chest, like they were the only solid things left in a world that had dissolved into chaos. When they lowered her parents into the ground, Josie spoke the 23rd Psalm in a voice that shook, but never broke. Garrett stood with his hat in his hands, feeling the hot Colorado sun beating down on them, thinking about duty and responsibility, and how both were about to complicate his carefully ordered life. The ride back to his ranch was silent, except for the rhythmic clop of hooves and the whisper of wind through the pine trees that dotted the mountainside. Josie rode behind him on his horse, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist, her body swaying with exhaustion. He could feel her trembling and wondered if she was crying, but when he glanced back, her face was dry and distant, staring at nothing. The Xavier Ranch sat in a valley surrounded by red rock formations and rolling hills covered in scrub grass. It was not the largest spread in the territory, but Garrett had built it from nothing over the past 7 years, ever since he had mustered out of the cavalry at 21. The ranch house was solid pine with a stone chimney, a covered porch, and real glass windows he had hauled all the way from Denver. The barn was newer, painted red, with a good roof and space for 20 horses. His cattle grazed on the hillsides, several hundred head of mixed breeds that he was slowly improving with careful breeding. His hired hand, an older Mexican man named Carlos who had worked for him for 3 years, came out of the barn when he heard them approaching. Carlos took one look at Josie's torn dress and haunted eyes and asked no questions, just nodded and took the horse to unsaddle and water. "We have a guest," Garrett said simply. "Josie, this is Carlos. He helps me run the ranch. Carlos, this is Josephine Wright. She will be staying with us for a while." Josie said nothing, just clutched her bundle of belongings and stared at the house like it was a fortress she was being forced to enter. Inside, the house was sparse but clean. Garrett lived alone and had no particular talent for decoration, so the main room held only a sturdy table, 4 chairs, a fireplace with a mantel, and a rocking chair his mother had left him before she died. A rug covered part of the wooden floor. The kitchen area occupied one corner, with a cast iron stove and shelves holding basic supplies. "There is a bedroom in the back," Garrett said, leading her through the house. "It was meant to be a guest room, but I have never had guests before. The bed has clean sheets. There is a basin for washing. I will bring you some water." Josie walked into the small room and looked around at the simple bed, the wooden dresser, the window overlooking the side yard where chickens scratched in the dirt. She set down her bundle and turned to face him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." Garrett considered this question. He was not a man given to long speeches or elaborate explanations. "Because you needed help," he said finally. "Because leaving you out there alone would have been wrong. Because my mother taught me that when someone is in trouble, you do what you can. It is just duty, nothing more complicated than that." Something flickered in her eyes at the word duty, some emotion he could not quite read. "I will not be a burden," she said. "I can work. I can cook and clean and help with whatever needs doing. I will earn my keep." "Right now you need to rest," Garrett said. "You have been through something no person should have to experience. Take today to grieve. Tomorrow we can figure out the rest." But Josie shook her head firmly. "If I stop moving, I will fall apart. Please, just tell me what needs doing and I will do it." So Garrett, who had never been good at arguing with determined women, showed her around the ranch. He showed her the chicken coop where she could gather eggs, the garden that desperately needed weeding, the kitchen where supplies were running low because he kept forgetting to bake bread. He showed her the pump where they drew water, the clothesline where washing hung to dry, the woodpile that needed stacking. Josie listened to everything with intense focus, as if memorizing each detail would keep her mind from traveling to darker places. When he finished, she simply nodded and set to work gathering eggs, moving through the task with mechanical precision. That evening, Garrett came in from checking the cattle to find the house transformed. The floor had been swept. The dishes had been washed and put away. Fresh bread sat cooling on the counter, filling the house with the smell of yeast and warmth. Josie stood at the stove stirring something in a pot, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, her torn dress replaced with one of his old shirts belted at the waist over her skirt. "I hope you do not mind," she said, gesturing at the shirt. "My dress was ruined. I found this in the laundry and thought you might not miss it." "I do not mind," Garrett said, struck by how different she looked compared to the broken girl he had found that morning. She still looked exhausted, still had that haunted quality around her eyes, but she was moving with purpose now, anchored by the simple necessity of tasks. They ate dinner together in awkward silence, both uncertain how to navigate this strange new arrangement. Garrett was used to eating alone or with Carlos, who understood the value of comfortable quiet. Having a woman at his table felt foreign, almost intrusive, but not unpleasant. "The stew is good," he said finally, because it seemed like something he should acknowledge. "My mother taught me," Josie said, then stopped, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully. "I keep forgetting they are gone. For a moment I was just cooking like always, and then I remembered, and it was like losing them all over again." Garrett did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just sat with her in the silence of shared grief. He had lost his own parents years ago, his father to a Comanche raid and his mother to pneumonia the following winter. He remembered that strange sensation of forgetting and remembering, the way grief ambushed you in ordinary moments. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm neither of them had planned, but both accepted as necessary. Josie threw herself into the work of maintaining the household with fierce determination, waking before dawn to start breakfast, spending her days cleaning, cooking, mending, and managing the endless small tasks that kept a ranch running. Garrett found himself coming into hot meals, clean clothes, and a house that felt lived in rather than just occupied. He tried to pay her for the work, but she refused. "You gave me shelter when I had nothing," she said. "This is the least I can do." "You are doing more than anyone could expect," Garrett replied. "You should have something of your own, some independence." "What I need is to feel useful," Josie said firmly. "Please just let me do this." So Garrett stopped arguing, though he started leaving money in an old coffee tin on the kitchen shelf, adding to it each week whether she wanted it or not. She never mentioned it, but he noticed she never touched it either, letting it accumulate like a promise of future possibilities. Carlos, who had been skeptical at first about having a woman on the ranch, became one of Josie's staunchest allies. She brought him lunch in the barn and stayed to talk while he worked, asking questions about the horses and cattle, learning the rhythms of ranch life with genuine curiosity. He taught her to identify which cows were ready to calf, how to spot signs of illness in the horses, and where the best fishing holes were in the creek that ran through the property. "She is good for you," Carlos said to Garrett one evening as they mended fence together. "The house has life in it now. She is just a guest," Garrett said, a little too quickly. "Once she figures out what she wants to do, where she wants to go, she will move on." Carlos gave him a look that suggested he was being deliberately obtuse. "Sure, boss, whatever you say." But the truth was that Garrett had been thinking about Josie more than he cared to admit, not just thinking about her presence in his house, but thinking about her. The way she hummed while she worked, wordless melodies that sounded like hymns. The way she stood on the porch in the evenings watching the sunset paint the rocks red and gold, her face finally relaxed and peaceful. The way she laughed when the chickens escaped their coop and had to be chased back, a sound of pure joy that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. He found himself inventing reasons to come back to the house during the day, checking on things that did not really need checking, just to see her. He noticed small details he had no business noticing, like the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, or how she always tasted the stew with the same spoon and then stirred it back in, or the fact that she was left-handed but tried to do most tasks with her right hand, as if someone had once tried to correct her. October arrived with crisp mornings and the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. Garrett needed to make a supply run into La Veta, and after some debate, he asked Josie if she wanted to come along. "I have not been to town since I arrived," she said, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "I probably should, though. I need fabric to make some proper dresses and other things." La Veta was a small mining town that had grown prosperous on silver and copper, with a main street lined with false front buildings and boardwalks to keep pedestrians out of the mud. The population was mixed, miners and ranchers and railroad men, with a few Chinese laundries and Mexican restaurants adding diversity to the predominantly white settlement. As they rode into town in Garrett's wagon, people stared. A few of the older women whispered behind their hands, and Garrett felt a spike of protective anger. Josie sat straight-backed beside him, her chin lifted, refusing to show any reaction to the gossip that was clearly already spreading. At the general store, Mrs. Patterson, the merchant's wife, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity. "Garrett Xavier, I heard you had taken in a young woman, quite the scandal." "This is Miss Josephine Wright," Garrett said evenly. "Her parents were killed by outlaws on the pass. She is staying at my ranch until she decides what she wants to do next. There is no scandal in providing basic human decency to someone in need." Mrs. Patterson had the grace to look slightly ashamed. Of course. I meant no offense, dear," she said to Josie. "It must have been terrible, what you went through. Let me help you find what you need." They spent an hour in the store while Josie selected fabric, thread, and other necessities. Garrett noticed she chose practical colors and sturdy materials, nothing frivolous or expensive. When they went to pay, she tried to use some of the money from the coffee tin that she had finally taken. "I have it," Garrett said, waving away her coins. "You have already done so much," Josie protested. "And I can do a little more," Garrett said. "Let me." She relented, but he could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between gratitude and the desire to stand on her own. They were loading the wagon when they encountered Sheriff Tom Hastings, a friend of Garrett's from his cavalry days. Tom had lost his left arm in the same skirmish where Garrett had taken a bullet in the thigh, and they had helped each other survive the rough journey back to the fort. Now, Tom kept the peace in La Veta with a combination of diplomatic skill and a fast draw with his remaining hand. "Garrett," Tom said, shaking hands, "this must be Miss Wright. I heard about what happened to your parents, miss. Terrible business. We have been looking for the Murphy gang for months, but they are like ghosts in these mountains." "They will not be looking for anyone anymore," Josie said quietly. "Not the ones who attacked us." "Yes, I heard about that too," Tom said with a hint of respect in his voice. 3 shots, 3 kills. That is impressive shooting, especially under stress. Your father taught you well." "He taught me to survive," Josie said. "I just wish he could have survived too." They talked for a few more minutes, Tom catching Garrett up on local news and warning him about some cattle rustlers who had been working the area south of town. As they prepared to leave, Tom pulled Garrett aside. "People are going to talk," he said quietly. "You know how it is. Young woman living alone with a single man, no family around. It does not matter that you are doing the right thing. Folks will make assumptions." "Let them talk," Garrett said. "I know the truth, and so does Josie. That is all that matters." "Just be careful," Tom said. "For her reputation as much as yours." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but not uncomfortable. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air smelled of pine and the coming winter. Garrett was aware of Josie sitting beside him, her shoulder occasionally brushing his as the wagon hit bumps in the road, and he wondered when exactly she had stopped being a duty and started being something else entirely. That night, after dinner, they sat on the porch together for the first time. It had become Josie's habit to watch the sunset alone, and Garrett had always respected that, but this evening she had invited him to join her, gesturing to the empty chair beside her rocking chair. "I have been thinking," she said after a long silence. About what happens next. I cannot stay here indefinitely, living on your charity. People in town are already talking. I heard the whispers today. Garrett felt something cold settle in his chest. What are you thinking of doing? I could look for work in town, Josie said. Maybe as a seamstress or a cook. The hotel might need someone. Or I could try to contact my aunt in California, see if the offer of a home is still available, even though I would be arriving alone. You do not have to decide right now, Garrett said. You have been through a trauma. You should take time to heal before making big decisions about your future. I am healed enough, Josie said, though her voice wavered slightly. I have nightmares every night. I wake up seeing their faces, both my parents and the men I killed. I do not think that will ever completely go away. But I cannot let it paralyze me. I need to move forward. Moving forward does not have to mean leaving, Garrett said, and was surprised by the intensity in his own voice. Josie turned to look at him, and in the fading light her eyes were huge and dark. What do you mean? Garrett was not a man comfortable with emotional declarations. He was better with horses and cattle than with words, better at showing than telling. But something about this moment demanded honesty, demanded that he step outside his comfort zone and risk saying what he had been feeling for weeks. I mean that when I brought you here, it was out of duty, he said carefully. It was the right thing to do, and I did it because I could not live with myself if I had left you alone out there. But somewhere along the way, duty stopped being the reason. You have become part of this place, Josie. You have made this house a home instead of just a building where I sleep. When I am out checking the herd, I find myself thinking about coming back, about seeing you on the porch or hearing you humming in the kitchen. You have brought life to this place, and to me. Keeping you here has become the greatest joy I have known in years. Josie was very still, barely breathing. Garrett, I do not know what to say. I am grateful for everything you have done, but I do not want gratitude to be confused with something else. I do not want to be another duty, another responsibility you take on because it is the right thing to do. You are not a duty anymore, Garrett said. You stopped being a duty the day you laughed at those chickens escaping, the day you brought Carlos lunch and stayed to talk with him, the day you hummed while making bread and I realized I had memorized the melody. I am not asking you to make any decisions tonight. I am just asking you to consider staying, not as a guest or a housekeeper, but as someone who belongs here. As someone I want here, for purely selfish reasons that have nothing to do with duty. Josie stood up abruptly and walked to the porch railing, gripping it with both hands. My parents have been dead for less than 2 months. I am still grieving them. I still wake up crying. I still see their faces in my dreams. How can I possibly think about anything else right now? How can I know what I feel when everything is still so raw? Garrett rose and crossed to stand beside her, careful not to touch her, respecting her space. You do not have to know anything right now. I am not asking for an answer or a commitment. I just wanted you to know that you have options. That staying here, staying with me, is an option if you want it. Take all the time you need to grieve, to heal, to figure out who you are now that your life has changed so drastically. I will wait. Why? Josie asked, turning to face him. Why would you wait? You barely know me. We have only lived in the same house for a few weeks. This does not make sense. Maybe it does not have to make sense, Garrett said. Maybe sometimes you just know things without being able to explain them. I look at you and I see strength and resilience and beauty. Not just in your face, but in the way you keep moving forward even when everything has fallen apart. I see someone who works hard and finds joy in simple things and treats people with kindness, even when the world has been cruel to her. I see someone I want to know better, someone I want beside me not just for a few weeks but for much longer. That might not make logical sense, but it is true anyway. Josie's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I need time," she whispered. "I need to think about this, about what I want and what I am capable of feeling right now." "Can you give me that? All the time you need," Garrett promised. "Nothing has to change. We can go on exactly as we have been for as long as you need." But of course things did change, because once words are spoken, they cannot be taken back. The awareness between them grew stronger, more charged. Garrett caught Josie watching him sometimes, her expression thoughtful and complex. She started finding excuses to be near him, helping with chores that did not require her assistance, asking questions about the ranch that kept him talking longer than necessary. One evening in late October, a sudden snowstorm rolled through, unseasonably early and fierce. Garrett was out checking on the cattle, making sure they had shelter, when his horse stepped wrong and threw him hard against a rock. He managed to get back on and make it to the barn, but his vision was swimming and his ribs screamed with pain. Carlos was not around, having gone into town to visit his daughter, so it was Josie who found him when he stumbled into the house, soaking wet and barely able to stand. She gasped and rushed to help him, supporting his weight as she guided him to his bedroom. "I am fine," Garrett tried to say, but the words came out slurred. "You are not fine," Josie said firmly. "You are hurt and freezing. Sit down on the bed. I need to check for injuries." She helped him out of his wet coat and shirt with brisk efficiency, her hands gentle but impersonal, treating him like a patient rather than a man. But Garrett, even through the haze of pain and cold, was acutely aware of her touch, of her face close to his as she examined the bruise already forming on his ribs. "Nothing broken, I think," she said, "but you are going to be in pain for a few days. You need to get out of these wet clothes completely and get warm. Can you manage that while I heat some water for tea?" Garrett nodded, not trusting his voice. Josie left the room, pulling the door closed behind her, and he struggled out of his wet pants and into dry long johns, every movement sending shafts of pain through his torso. By the time he was decent and had managed to get under the blankets, he was shaking with cold and shock. Josie returned with hot tea and extra blankets, piling them over him until he was buried in warmth. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the cup to his lips when his hands shook too much to hold it himself. "You scared me," she said quietly. "When I saw you come in like that, I thought something terrible had happened." "Takes more than a fall to finish me off," Garrett said, managing a weak smile. "Do not joke," Josie said, and there were tears on her cheeks now. "Do not joke about things like that. I cannot lose someone else. I cannot go through that again." Garrett lifted one hand and wiped away her tears with his thumb, cupping her face in his palm. "I am fine, Josie, I promise. Just bruised and cold, nothing serious." But Josie was crying harder now, all the emotion she had been holding back for months finally breaking through. "When I saw you hurt, I realized that I have been lying to myself. I told myself I needed time, that I was not ready to feel anything for anyone. But the truth is that I have already fallen in love with you. Somewhere between you taking me in and giving me a home and making me feel safe again, I fell completely in love with you. And the thought of losing you terrified me in a way I have not been terrified since my parents died." Garrett pulled her down against his chest, ignoring the pain in his ribs, holding her while she sobbed. "I love you too," he said into her hair. "I think I started loving you the moment I saw you standing over those outlaws, still fighting even when everything had been taken from you. You were the strongest, bravest person I had ever seen, and you still are." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, letting years of loneliness and recent grief pour out in shared tears. When Josie finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, but she was smiling for the first time since her parents died, really smiling, with joy reaching all the way to her eyes. "This is probably improper," she said. "Me sitting on your bed, you half-dressed, no chaperone." "Probably," Garrett agreed, "but I find I do not much care about proper right now." Josie laughed, that wonderful sound that he had been hearing in his dreams. "Neither do I, though I should probably go make you some soup and let you rest. You need to recover." "Stay a little longer," Garrett said, catching her hand. "Just sit with me. Talk to me. Tell me about your life before the good parts. I want to know everything about you." So Josie settled more comfortably on the bed, careful not to jostle his injuries, and began to talk. She told him about growing up on a farm in Kansas, about her father who taught school in the winter and farmed in the summer, about her mother who could make anything grow and always had fresh flowers on the table. She told him about learning to shoot, how her father had treated her like an equal and taught her the same skills he would have taught a son. She told him about the decision to move to California, the dream of buying an orange grove and starting over in a place where the winters were not so harsh. She told him about small things too, everyday memories that became precious in retrospect. Her mother's singing voice, her father's terrible jokes, the family dog who had died the year before and how they had all cried. The Christmas when she was 10 and got her first real dress from a store instead of homemade, how special she had felt wearing it to church. In turn, Garrett told her about his own childhood, following his father from fort to fort as an Army scout. He told her about learning to track and hunt from his father, about his mother who insisted on maintaining civilization even in the roughest outposts, making sure he knew how to read and write and do his sums. He told her about their deaths, the violence and suddenness of it, how he had come home from a scouting mission to find the homestead burned and both parents gone. He told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the hard years of scrimping and saving and slowly building up his herd, about the loneliness of it, coming home to an empty house night after night, wondering if this was all his life would ever be. "I had resigned myself to being alone," he said. "I had convinced myself I did not need anything more than the ranch and my work. And then you arrived and I realized I had just been existing, not living. You brought color back into a world that had become gray." The snow continued falling outside, muffling all sound, creating a cocoon of warmth and intimacy in the small bedroom. Eventually, Josie did go make soup, but she brought it back and they ate together with Garrett propped up on pillows, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other with the intense focus of people who have already decided their futures are intertwined. Over the next few days, as Garrett recovered from his injuries, their relationship shifted into something new and tender. They were careful with each other, mindful of the grief and trauma they had both experienced, but there was also joy now, a sense of possibility and hope that had been missing before. Garrett healed slowly, his ribs too sore to allow heavy work, so he spent more time around the house, helping Josie with smaller tasks, chopping vegetables for dinner, mending tack in the main room while she sewed new curtains. They talked constantly, never running out of things to say, discovering shared opinions and friendly arguments in equal measure. Carlos returned from town and took one look at them sitting together on the porch. Their chairs moved close enough that their fingers could intertwine between them, and grinned knowingly. "About time," was all he said, but his approval was obvious. November arrived with clearer skies and bitter cold. The cattle needed constant monitoring, the water sources needed to be kept from freezing, and the work of the ranch continued its relentless cycle. Garrett was back to full strength now, spending long days in the saddle, but he always came home for lunch, and Josie always had something ready for him. One afternoon, she surprised him by riding out to meet him on horseback, carrying lunch in a basket. She had borrowed one of his gentler mares and rode competently, sitting the horse with confidence. "I did not know you could ride," Garrett said, pleased by the surprise. "I grew up on a farm," Josie reminded him. "We had horses. I am not a great rider, but I can manage well enough. I thought you might like company for lunch today." They ate together on a hillside overlooking the valley, watching the cattle graze below them, the mountains rising sharp and snow capped in the distance. The sky was so blue it hurt to look at directly, and the air was so clear every detail stood out with crystalline precision. "I never want to leave this place," Josie said suddenly. "I never want to leave you. I know we should probably wait longer, be more proper about everything, but I know what I want now. I want to stay here with you as your wife if you will have me, for the rest of my life." Garrett set down his sandwich and turned to face her fully. "Are you sure? You do not have to rush into anything. We have time." "I am sure," Josie said. "I have spent 2 months grieving and healing and figuring out who I am now that my old life is gone. I have mourned my parents and I will always miss them, but I cannot let grief define the rest of my life. They would not want that. They would want me to be happy, to build a new life, to find love if I was lucky enough to have it offered. And you are offering me that, are you not? A life here with you." "I am offering you everything I have," Garrett said seriously. "My home, my name, my heart, such as it is. I want you to be my wife, Josie. I want to build a life with you, raise children if we are blessed with them, grow old together watching sunsets from that porch. I want all of it with you." Josie kissed him then, the first real kiss they had shared, tender and careful and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling, and Garrett thought he had never seen anything more beautiful than Josie's face lit up with happiness and hope. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in La Veta, with Sheriff Tom standing as witness and Carlos giving Josie away. She wore a dress she had made herself from the fabric they bought on that first trip to town, simple but elegant, and she carried wildflowers that Carlos had somehow found despite the late season. Garrett wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed, and tried not to feel too self-conscious standing in front of the traveling minister who happened to be passing through. The ceremony was short and sweet, the words traditional and unchanging. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Garrett he could kiss his bride, he did so carefully, aware of all the eyes on them but caring only about the woman in his arms. Mrs. Patterson had organized a small reception at the hotel, surprising them both with her unexpected generosity. "I may have been skeptical at first," she admitted to Josie, "but I can see you are good for each other. Garrett has not smiled this much in all the years I have known him." The whole town turned out, ranchers and miners and shopkeepers, all curious about the romance that had bloomed from tragedy. There was cake and dancing, and Garrett discovered that Josie loved to dance even though he was terrible at it, and she laughed when he stepped on her feet and made him try again. As the sun set and the party wound down, Garrett and Josie rode back to the ranch together in the wagon, now officially husband and wife. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, and their breath made clouds in the freezing air. "Are you happy?" Garrett asked as they pulled into the yard. "Happier than I thought I could be again," Josie said honestly. "Grief and joy can exist together, I am learning. I can be sad about my parents and happy about us at the same time. It does not dishonor their memory to move forward with my life." That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they learned each other in new ways, tentative and gentle, building intimacy with patience and care. Garrett was mindful of Josie's inexperience and the trauma she had survived, and Josie was grateful for his consideration. The way he made sure she felt safe and cherished rather than rushed or pressured. The winter that followed was harsh, with deep snows and temperatures that dropped below zero for days at a time. The ranch work became a constant battle against the cold, keeping the animals alive and healthy, preventing pipes from freezing, stockpiling enough wood to keep the fires burning. But inside the house, there was warmth and laughter and love. Josie proved to be everything Garrett had hoped for in a partner, working alongside him when needed, managing the household with efficient competence, but also bringing softness and joy to the hard life of a rancher. She sang while she worked, told stories in the evenings, read aloud from books they bought on trips to town. They learned to navigate the small conflicts that arise when two independent people suddenly share a life. Josie liked things organized in specific ways, and Garrett had lived alone too long to remember to put things back where they belonged. Garrett wanted to wake at dawn to get an early start on work, and Josie was not a morning person and grumbled at early wake-up calls. Josie wanted to save every penny for the future, and Garrett believed in spending a little on small pleasures that made life worth living. But they learned to compromise, to communicate, to choose their battles, and let small annoyances go in favor of preserving the peace and affection between them. They learned each other's habits and preferences, the little details that make shared life either harmonious or contentious. Christmas came, their first as a married couple, and Josie went all out decorating the house with pine boughs and making special meals. Carlos joined them for Christmas dinner, and they gave him a new saddle they had commissioned from the leatherworker in town. He gave them a hand-carved cradle, beautifully made from pine and cedar, its meaning unmistakable. "For when you need it," he said with a wink. "No hurry, but it will be ready when the time comes." Josie blushed but looked pleased, and Garrett felt a surge of anticipation at the thought of children, of filling the house with the noise and chaos of family. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting to reveal brown grass that would soon turn green. The cattle began calving, and Garrett and Carlos spent long days and nights in the barns helping difficult births and making sure the newborns survived. Josie helped where she could, bottle feeding the calves whose mothers could not nurse, staying up through the night with Garrett when a cow was having trouble. It was during one of these long nights that Josie finally told Garrett she was pregnant. They were sitting in the barn, watching a new calf struggle to its feet, and she just said it quietly into the darkness. "I am going to have a baby, in the fall, I think." Garrett turned to her, joy and fear warring in his chest. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Josie said. "I have all the signs my mother told me about. I am happy, Garrett. I am scared too, but mostly happy." He pulled her close, careful of her belly even though there was no sign of the baby yet, and kissed the top of her head. "I am happy too, terrified but happy. We are going to be parents." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Josie bloomed with health, her face glowing, her body changing in ways that Garrett found miraculous and slightly alarming. He became overly protective, not wanting her to do heavy work or ride horses or do anything that might endanger the baby. Josie tolerated his concern for a while, then finally put her foot down. "I am pregnant, not made of glass. Women have been having babies while doing farm work since the beginning of time. I promise I will be careful, but you have to let me live my life." So Garrett tried to relax, though it was difficult, especially as her belly grew large and obvious, and he worried constantly about complications. He read every book on childbirth he could find, grilled the doctor in Lavetta with questions, and drove Josie slightly crazy with his hovering. In October, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Josie went into labor. It was late afternoon, and Garrett was repairing the barn roof when she called to him from the house, her voice calm but firm. "It is time. You need to get the doctor." Garrett nearly fell off the roof in his haste to get down. He rode to town faster than he had ever ridden, practically dragged the doctor back to the ranch, and then spent the longest night of his life pacing in the main room while Josie labored in the bedroom with the doctor and the midwife they had hired attending her. The sounds coming from the bedroom terrified him, Josie's groans of pain and effort making him want to break down the door and somehow make it stop. But Carlos, who had come to wait with him, kept him calm with quiet conversation and frequent reminders that childbirth was hard but natural, that Josie was strong and would get through it. Just before dawn, a baby's cry split the air, thin and reedy and absolutely beautiful. The midwife came out a few minutes later, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy with a good set of lungs. Your wife did wonderfully. She is tired but fine. You can go in now." Garrett walked into the bedroom on shaking legs to find Josie propped up against pillows, exhausted and sweaty but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "We have a son," she said. "Come meet your son." Garrett approached slowly, almost afraid to touch something so small and fragile. The baby had a scrunched red face, a tiny nose, and impossibly small fingers that curled into fists. Dark hair covered his head, and his eyes, when they opened briefly, were dark blue. "He is perfect," Garrett said, his voice breaking. "You are perfect. I love you both so much." They named him Samuel Thomas, Samuel after Josie's father and Thomas after the sheriff who had been such a good friend. Little Sam was a good baby, sleeping well and feeding enthusiastically, and Garrett discovered that fatherhood was both more terrifying and more wonderful than he had imagined. He watched his son with constant amazement, marveling at every tiny change and development. Josie was a natural mother, patient and loving, though she admitted to being overwhelmed sometimes by the constant demands of caring for an infant. "I understand now why my mother always looked tired," she said one evening, bouncing Sam while trying to eat dinner one-handed. "This is the hardest work I have ever done, but also the most rewarding." The ranch continued to prosper as the years passed. Garrett expanded his herd, bought more land, built a bigger barn. Carlos eventually retired from heavy ranch work, but stayed on in a small house they built for him, helping with lighter tasks and spending hours entertaining Sam with stories and carved wooden toys. When Sam was 2, Josie became pregnant again, and this time Garrett managed to be slightly less panicked about the whole process. Their daughter was born in spring, a tiny thing with her mother's eyes and a calm disposition that contrasted sharply with her energetic brother. They named her Margaret Rose, called Maggie from the start, and she completed their family in a way Garrett had not known was missing. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm, the seasons turning, the children growing, the ranch thriving. There were hard times too, droughts and harsh winters and illnesses that scared them, but they weathered everything together, their love deepening with each challenge overcome. On their 10th anniversary, Garrett and Josie sat on the porch together watching the sunset, just as they had on that night when everything changed. Sam and Maggie were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze, and Carlos was teaching them how to braid rope. "Do you ever think about what your life might have been like if I had not found you that day?" Garrett asked. Josie considered the question. "Sometimes. I think about my parents a lot, wonder what they would think of all this, if they would be proud of the life I have built. But I try not to dwell on what-ifs. This is the life I have, and it is a good life, better than I dared to hope for in those dark days after they died." "I think about it too," Garrett said. "I think about how close I came to just riding past that morning, minding my own business. I almost did, you know. I was in a hurry to get to town. But something made me stop, made me investigate. Call it fate or luck or divine intervention, but I will be grateful for it every day for the rest of my life." "It was not fate that made you take me in," Josie said. "That was your choice, your kindness. You saw someone in need and you helped, even though it would have been easier not to. That is who you are, Garrett. That is why I fell in love with you." "I took you in out of duty," Garrett said, echoing the words he had used years ago. "But keeping you, loving you, building this life with you, that has been my greatest joy. You and our children are everything I never knew I needed." Josie leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sun sink below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The children's laughter mingled with Carlos's patient instructions, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed in the gathering dusk. It was a simple moment, unremarkable in many ways, but it contained everything that mattered. Love and family, hard work and its rewards, the quiet satisfaction of a life built with purpose and care. Garrett Xavier had started out as a lonely rancher resigned to solitude, and Josephine Wright had lost everything in a single terrible morning. But together, they had built something beautiful from duty and tragedy, something that would last long after they were gone. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle. Sam grew into a tall young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning every aspect of the work with serious dedication. Maggie became her mother's shadow, learning to cook and sew and manage a household, but also insisting on learning to ride and rope like her brother, refusing to be limited by expectations of what girls should or should not do. Carlos lived to see both children grown, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by the family he had helped build even if he shared no blood with them. They buried him on the hill overlooking the valley, and planted a tree at his grave that would grow strong and provide shade for generations to come. More children came, 2 more sons and another daughter, each one treasured and loved, each one adding to the noise and chaos and joy of the Xavier household. The ranch house had to be expanded twice to accommodate everyone, growing from a simple cabin into a sprawling home that echoed with conversation and laughter. Josie never forgot her parents, keeping their photograph on the mantel and telling stories about them to her children and eventually grandchildren. She visited their graves whenever she traveled near that pass, bringing flowers and spending time in quiet remembrance. The grief never completely disappeared, but it transformed over time into something softer, a bittersweet ache that reminded her of where she came from and how far she had traveled. Garrett never took for granted the miracle of his family, the way his lonely life had been transformed by one act of common decency. He taught his sons the importance of helping those in need, of doing the right thing even when it was difficult, of valuing honor and compassion above personal convenience. When Sam announced at 21 that he was in love with a girl from town, the daughter of the general store owners, Garrett and Josie hosted the wedding at the ranch, a grand celebration that brought people from 3 counties. Watching his son get married, Garrett was struck by how quickly time had passed, how the baby he had held with trembling hands was now a man starting his own family. Maggie proved to be more independent, announcing at 18 that she wanted to become a teacher like her grandfather had been. She moved to Denver to attend normal school, though she came home for holidays and summers, always full of stories about city life and her studies. Eventually, she married a lawyer and settled in Colorado Springs, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to have her own life. The younger children followed their own paths, some staying on the ranch, others moving to towns and cities, but all remaining close to their parents and to each other. The Xavier family became known throughout the region for their strong bonds and their willingness to help neighbors in need. As Garrett and Josie aged, they gradually handed over the day-to-day running of the ranch to Sam and his wife, though Garrett still rode out to check on the cattle well into his 60s, and Josie still cooked Sunday dinners for whoever could make it home. They watched La Veta grow from a rough mining town into a more established community with schools and churches and civic organizations. They saw the railroad come through, bringing easier access to markets and supplies. They witnessed the slow transformation of the Wild West into something more settled and civilized, with all the benefits and losses that entailed. On warm evenings, they still sat on the porch together, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the long road that had brought them to this point. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that only comes from decades of shared life and deep understanding. "You have any regrets?" Josie asked one evening when they were both in their 70s and their hair had gone silver. Garrett considered the question carefully. "Only that we will not have more time. Whatever years we have left will not be enough. I could live 1,000 years with you and still want more." "That is not really a regret," Josie pointed out with a smile. "That is just love." "Then no," Garrett said. "I have no regrets. Every choice I made that led me to you was the right choice. Every hard day was worth it to get to the good ones. I would not change a single thing." "Neither would I," Josie said. "Except I wish my parents could have met you, could have known you were taking care of me. They would have loved you. They would have been so happy to see the life we built." "I think they know," Garrett said softly. "Wherever they are. I think they know you are loved and safe and happy. That is all any parent wants for their child." They sat together as darkness fell and the stars came out, the same stars that had watched them since that terrible morning 40 years ago when their paths had first crossed. The house behind them was full of family. 3 generations gathered for Sunday dinner, and the sounds of conversation and laughter drifted out through the open windows. Garrett Xavier had taken in Josephine Wright out of duty that September day in 1877, but keeping her, loving her, building a life with her had become his greatest joy. And as he sat holding her hand on the porch they had sat on together for 4 decades, he knew with absolute certainty that he was the luckiest man who had ever lived. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed down through generations who would carry their values and their love forward into the future. The land would remain, the mountains would stand eternal, and somewhere in the stones and soil would be the echo of a love that had started with tragedy and duty, but had bloomed into something transcendent and enduring. That was the true Wild West romance, not the gunfights and gold rushes that filled dime novels, but the quiet heroism of ordinary people building lives together in an unforgiving land. It was in the daily choice to show up and do the work, to love through hard times and good, to create family and community where none had existed before. And when Garrett Xavier died peacefully at 79, with Josie holding his hand and his children and grandchildren surrounding his bed, his last words were of gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to his wife. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for staying. Thank you for everything." Josie lived 3 more years, cared for by her devoted family, still sharp and engaged with life until the very end. She spent her final years writing down the story of her life, wanting her grandchildren and great-grandchildren to know where they came from, the love and sacrifice and luck that had made their lives possible. She wrote about her parents and their dreams, about that terrible day that had nearly destroyed her, about the cowboy who had taken her in when she had nothing. She wrote about falling in love, about building a home in the wilderness, about the joys and struggles of family and ranch life. She wrote it all down in careful script, filling several notebooks with memories and wisdom. On the day she died, surrounded by family just as Garrett had been, she looked at her children one last time and smiled. "I am ready," she said. "Your father is waiting for me, and I have been without him long enough. Take care of each other. Love each other. That is all that really matters in the end." They buried her beside Garrett on the hill overlooking the valley, under the same big sky that had witnessed their entire life together. The headstone was simple: Josephine Wright Xavier, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. And below that, added by her children who understood what her marriage had meant to her, she was his greatest joy. The ranch remained in the Xavier family for generations. The house expanded and modernized, but still recognizable. The story of Garrett and Josie became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. A reminder of how love could bloom even from tragedy, how duty could transform into joy, and how two broken people could heal each other and build something lasting. In the end, that was what the Wild West had really been about. Not the violence and adventure that filled stories and songs, but the quiet courage of ordinary people choosing to build lives in a hard land. It was about men like Garrett Xavier, who did the right thing because it was right, and women like Josephine Wright, who survived unspeakable loss and still found the strength to love again. Their love story was not dramatic in the way of romance novels, filled with grand gestures and impossible obstacles. It was quieter than that, more real. It was in morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, in hands held during difficult births and painful losses, in the choice made every day to stay and work and build together. It was in the ranch that thrived because they made it thrive, in the children who grew strong and confident because they were loved, in the community that benefited from their generosity and example. And long after they were gone, when the Wild West had become just history, and the frontier had closed, and the world had moved on into a new century with automobiles and electricity and all manner of wonders, their love still echoed in the land they had tended, in the family they had created, in the simple truth that sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones that look like ordinary life, but are filled with extraordinary love. The ranch stands still, though it has changed hands outside the family now, the land subdivided and sold to new owners who do not know the full history of the place they call home. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the mountains and paints the sky in shades of gold and crimson, people say you can still feel something special in the air, some lingering warmth that defies explanation. Perhaps it is just the beauty of the landscape, the timeless grandeur of mountains and sky. Or perhaps it is the echo of all the love that soaked into that land over the years, all the joy and sorrow and daily living that happened there. Perhaps some places remember the people who loved them, and hold those memories like treasures long after everyone who made them has turned to dust. In the old cemetery in La Veta, the headstones for Garrett and Josie Xavier stand side by side, weathered by over a century of Colorado seasons but still legible. Occasionally tourists stop to take pictures, drawn by the romantic notion of frontier love stories, not knowing the full truth of what those two people meant to each other and the life they built together. But their descendants know. The story has been passed down faithfully through 5 generations now, embellished perhaps in some details, but true in all the ways that matter. Every Xavier knows about the cowboy who took in a grieving young woman out of duty, but found his greatest joy in keeping her, in loving her, in building a life with her that outlasted them both and continues to influence their family to this day. It is a love story for the ages, not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real. Because it showed how love can grow from the smallest seed of kindness, how duty can transform into devotion, how two people who had every reason to give up instead chose to move forward together. It showed how the right person at the right time can change everything, can take a tragedy and transform it into a new beginning. That September morning in 1877, when Garrett Xavier heard that gunshot and made the choice to investigate instead of riding on, he changed not just his own life, but the lives of countless people who would come after him. Every child and grandchild and great-grandchild who existed because he took in Josephine Wright. Every moment of happiness and love and family that flowed from that single decision was a testament to the power of choosing compassion over convenience. And Josie, who lost everything in one terrible morning and somehow found the courage to love again, to trust again, to build a new life from the ashes of her old one, showed what true strength looked like. It was not in the shooting of those outlaws, though that took courage too. It was in getting up every morning after her world had ended and choosing to keep living, to keep trying, to remain open to the possibility of joy even when grief still weighed heavy on her heart. Together, they created something beautiful and lasting, a love that sustained them through 4 decades of marriage and continues to inspire their descendants more than a century later. They proved that sometimes the best love stories are not about love at first sight or grand romantic gestures, but about the daily choice to show up, to do the work, to care for each other through all the ordinary moments that make up a life. The Wild West was a harsh place that tested everyone who lived there. But it was also a place where new beginnings were possible, where people could reinvent themselves, where love could bloom in unlikely places. Garrett and Josie's story embodied all of that. The hardness and the hope, the loss and the love, the way duty and joy could intertwine until they became inseparable. In the end, that is what their story teaches, that the greatest adventures are often the ones that look like ordinary life, that the deepest joys come from simple commitments kept faithfully, and that love, real love, is not about finding the perfect person but about choosing to build a life with someone, day by day, year by year, until those years add up to a lifetime of shared memories and intertwined souls. Garrett took her in out of duty, but keeping her became his greatest joy. And in that transformation, in that journey from obligation to devotion, lies a truth that transcends time and place. That love, at its best, is both a choice and a gift, something we decide to do and something that happens to us, a daily recommitment and a lifelong journey that makes everything else worthwhile. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and memory and the continuation of life by those they left behind. But in another sense, their story never ends at all. It lives on in every Xavier who inherits their values, in every person who hears their tale and takes courage from it, in every couple who faces hardship together and chooses love anyway. That is the legacy of Garrett and Josie Xavier. Not just the ranch they built or the children they raised, but the example they set of what love could be when nurtured with patience and care and daily recommitment. They showed that the best love stories are true ones, lived in real time by real people facing real challenges, and that those stories are more powerful than any fiction because they prove what is possible when two people truly commit to each other and to building something lasting together. The mountains of Colorado still stand as they stood in 1877, eternal and unchanging. The valley where the Xavier Ranch was built still turns green in spring and gold in autumn. The sun still sets in spectacular displays of color that take the breath away. And somewhere in the wind that blows through those mountains, in the land that still remembers, the love of Garrett and Josie Xavier continues to echo, a testament to the transformative power of kindness, duty, and joy freely given and gratefully received.